The mysterious prisoner. The cold metal walls of the Xelthari warship hummed softly as the engines carried it through deep space. Inside the dark interrogation chamber, a single figure sat chained to the floor. The prisoner, a human named Captain Daniel Rains, had been captured during the latest battle between the Xelthari Empire and the human forces. A tall, armored alien stood before him, watching with sharp, reptilian eyes. This was War Chief Malixor, one of the most feared commanders in the Xelthari fleet. His species had conquered dozens of worlds. They had broken warriors from across the galaxy. But as he looked at this human, something felt wrong. Daniel sat with his hands chained behind his back, his face bloodied from the beating his captors had given him. But he did not beg. He did not plead. Instead, he smirked. "You're awfully quiet for a prisoner," Malixor said, stepping closer. His deep voice echoed in the chamber. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And you're awfully chatty for a warlord." Malixor's eyes narrowed. He had expected screams. He had expected fear. But this human acted as if being captured was just another inconvenience. The war chief walked in a slow circle around him. "Do you not understand your situation, human? You are alone. Your fleet has abandoned you. Your people have left you to die." Daniel chuckled. "That's cute. You actually think they left me behind." Malixor frowned. "They will not come for you. You keep telling yourself that," Daniel replied, shifting slightly to get comfortable. The warlord growled. He had seen other prisoners break within hours. The Xelthari were experts in extracting information, in shattering minds. But something about this human felt different. Malixor turned to his second-in-command, a scientist named Xelthari, who had been studying humans for months. "Why is he not afraid?" Xelthari hesitated before answering. "Humans are unusual, my lord. They do not react as expected." Malixor scoffed. "All creatures react the same. All creatures fear pain. All creatures fear death." Xelthari hesitated again. "Not them." Malixor turned back to Daniel, stepping closer until their faces were only inches apart. "Tell me, human," he said, his voice dripping with malice, "what makes your kind so arrogant?" Daniel smirked again. "Arrogance? No, you've got it all wrong. Oh, we don't think we're special." He leaned forward slightly. "We think we're normal." Silence filled the chamber. Malixor studied the human's face, searching for a hint of deception. But Daniel's eyes held no fear, no doubt, only quiet amusement. The war chief turned away, frustrated. "Enough of this. Take him to the lab. I want to know what makes his kind so unbreakable." Two Xelthari guards stepped forward, grabbing Daniel's arms. He let them drag him toward the door. But as he passed Malixor, he whispered, just loud enough for the warlord to hear, "You should be afraid." Malixor's jaw clenched. A strange chill ran down his spine. For the first time in his long, brutal career, he felt uneasy. And that was the most terrifying part of all. Fear of the unknown. Daniel Rains barely flinched as the cold metal floor scraped against his boots. The two Xelthari guards dragged him down a long, dimly lit corridor, their clawed hands gripping his arms like iron shackles. He had been in bad situations before, but this was something else. The Xelthari were known across the galaxy as ruthless conquerors. They crushed civilizations, broke warriors, and made even the strongest beg for mercy. Yet, as Daniel was hauled toward what he assumed was a laboratory or torture chamber, he found himself almost amused. His captors, they were nervous. They weren't speaking, weren't taunting him like they had before. Instead, they glanced at each other, their fingers twitching over their weapons. They were afraid. And that made Daniel smile. The unsettling experiment. Inside the laboratory, the walls pulsed with a faint green glow, lined with strange devices filled with unknown fluids. Hovering drones buzzed overhead, scanning every inch of the room. In the center stood a metallic table, its surface covered in strange symbols. Runes of suffering, Daniel assumed. A figure stepped forward, taller than the others, wrapped in a deep red cloak. Its elongated skull-like face gave off an eerie, calculating aura. Xelthari, the Xelthari scientist, did not look like a warrior, but something about him felt colder than the rest. Malixer stood beside him, arms crossed, watching. Xelthari tilted his head. "You are different." Daniel chuckled. "That's what my ex-girlfriend said." No reaction. The scientist simply gestured, and the guards shoved Daniel onto the table, locking restraints around his wrists and ankles. "This will be simple," Xelthari continued, voice emotionless. "We wish to understand what makes your kind so unnatural." Daniel sighed, flexing his fingers in the restraints. "Unnatural. That's a little rude." Xelthari ignored him and tapped on a floating console. A sharp mechanical whir filled the room. A long, thin needle descended from the ceiling, glowing faintly with a strange blue energy. Daniel instinctively tensed. "This will read your neurological responses," Xelthari explained. "Your kind does not fear pain the way others do. We will discover why." Daniel grinned, though his heart pounded in his chest. "What? No dinner first?" The needle plunged into his forehead, a test they didn't expect. Pain exploded through his skull. Sharp, electric, searing. It felt like fire had been poured into his brain. Every nerve screamed. But Daniel, he laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It was real, uncontrolled, genuine. Malixer's eyes narrowed. "What trick is this?" Xelthari stared at the monitors, his expression unreadable. "His brain activity is strange." Daniel chuckled through the pain, shaking his head. "Yeah, get in line." The readings spiked, fluctuating in ways that Xelthari had never seen. Every other species had patterns, predictable responses to pain, fear, stress. But humans? The data was chaotic, unstable, unnatural. "He should be screaming," one of the guards muttered. "He is screaming." Xelthari corrected, his voice barely above a whisper, just in a different way. Daniel's laughter finally faded, and he let out a slow breath. "That all you got?" Malixer stepped closer, his claws tightening. "What are you?" Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "Just a guy from Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. And then the alarms started blaring. A nightmare for the Xelthari. A panicked voice crackled through the comms. "Warlord. Incoming human fleet. 2 destroyers and a battlecruiser. They are demanding we release their soldier immediately." Malixer's expression darkened. "Impossible. No species risks that many ships for one man." Daniel smirked. "You still don't get it, do you?" The warlord turned to him, rage and disbelief in his eyes. Daniel shrugged, as relaxed as ever. "You thought I was alone." He let the words sink in. "You thought they'd leave me behind." For the first time, true fear flickered across Malixer's face, because no other species in the galaxy would do this. No other species would risk war for one soldier. But humans, they did it without hesitation. The unsettling truth. The Xelthari warship trembled as distant explosions echoed through the metallic corridors. The human fleet had arrived. Malixer's claws tightened into fists as he turned toward the control panel, his reptilian eyes narrowing at the battlefield projections. A single human soldier, and they had come for him. No species had ever done this. It made no sense. He turned back toward Daniel Rains, still strapped to the metal table, still smiling like he had already won. "You are bluffing," Malixer growled. "No empire would risk war for one soldier." Daniel tilted his head. "Yeah. Then maybe you don't know us as well as you think." Xelthari, the scientist, remained silent, his long fingers hovering over the monitor, watching the strange fluctuations in Daniel's neural patterns. There was no fear, no panic, just calm. Like he expected this. The breaking point. A heavy impact rocked the warship. The lights flickered for a moment before emergency red strobes cast long shadows across the walls. Another explosion, then another. Malixer's comms flared to life. A panicked voice shouted, "Warlord! The humans, they are boarding the ship. They're cutting through our hull like it's nothing." Daniel grinned. "Told you." The warlord turned sharply to Xelthari. "How is this possible? We outnumber them. We outgun them." Xelthari hesitated. Then, finally, he spoke in a quiet, haunted voice. This is what I have been trying to explain, Warlord." His long fingers tapped at the monitor, scrolling through a series of reports. "The humans are not the strongest species, not the fastest. Their technology is not superior." He turned to face Malixer directly. "They are something worse." Malixer glared at him. "What are you saying?" Xelthari exhaled. "They do not fight like other species. Others calculate their chances. They surrender when the odds are against them. But humans," his glowing yellow eyes flickered toward Daniel, "they do not stop." Daniel chuckled. "Now you're getting it. A strategy of madness." The warlord's mind raced. He had read the reports. Humans survived things that should have killed them, fought battles they should have lost. And the most terrifying part, they thought this was normal. The comms flared again. "Warlord, we have cornered 2 humans in Corridor 17. A gunshot. A scream. Silence. Another voice. They just keep coming." Daniel flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. "You know, you could end this right now." Malixer turned to him. "What do you mean?" Daniel gave him an easy, almost lazy grin. "Simple. Let me go." The warlord growled. "Never." Daniel sighed. "All right then. Hope you like surprises." Before Malixer could react, the door to the lab exploded inward. The reckoning. Smoke filled the chamber as figures in dark armor stormed inside, rifles raised, moving with deadly precision. The Xelthari guards barely had time to react before sharp, controlled bursts of gunfire dropped them where they stood. A tall woman with piercing blue eyes stepped through the haze, her rifle steady. "Cap," she called, her voice steady. Daniel grinned. "Took you long enough." She smirked. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." Malixer took a step back. His mind screamed at him to run, to retreat, to surrender, but his pride, his warrior's instinct, refused. "You fools." He bared his fangs. "You cannot win against an empire." Daniel stood as his restraints were unlocked, rubbing his wrists. He stepped closer until he was eye level with the warlord. "You don't get it," Daniel said, voice calm. He nodded toward the dead Xelthari soldiers, toward the bodies littering the corridors. "You already lost." Malixer's stomach twisted. This wasn't war. This was something worse. A promise. A warning. A lesson. The last thing he saw before the humans dragged him away was Daniel's unshaken smile. The smile of a species that didn't know when to quit. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The realization. The Xelthari warship drifted in the void, fires raging across its decks. The once mighty vessel, a symbol of dominance, now lay broken. Smoke filled the hallways. Bodies of Xelthari warriors littered the cold floors. The human strike team moved with brutal efficiency, securing the last corridors with precise, disciplined fire. Malixer had never felt fear before. Until now. He knelt on the metal floor, his hands bound by human restraints, primitive in design but unbreakable in function. Around him, his warriors lay dead or captured. This was impossible. His fleet outnumbered the humans. His species was stronger, faster, built for war. And yet, they had lost. To a species that saw this as normal. A heavy bootstep echoed in front of him. Daniel Rains. The human stood with his arms crossed, studying Malixer with something almost like pity. "You don't get it, do you?" Daniel said, shaking his head. Malixer growled, baring his fangs. We were superior. Daniel chuckled. Were. The warlord's jaw clenched. You do not fight like warriors. You do not calculate. You throw yourselves into battle like mindless animals. Daniel smirked. Nah, we just don't know when to quit. A hard truth. Xelthari, the Xelthari scientist, still sat hunched over the lab console, staring at the battle reports. His glowing eyes flickered back and forth as he scrolled through the data. This shouldn't have happened. The numbers didn't make sense. He turned to Daniel, something like horror creeping into his voice. Humans, you do not retreat when outnumbered. You do not surrender when surrounded. You do not break under pressure. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And Xelthari hesitated. Then, in a whisper, he said, No other species behaves this way. Daniel shrugged. Sounds like a you problem. Xelthari's fingers twitched. You do not even see it, do you? This madness. Every other species knows its limits, knows when to stop, knows when a fight is over. Malixer, still on his knees, snapped his head toward the scientist. Enough of this. They won by luck, nothing more. Xelthari shook his head. No, my lord. Luck had nothing to do with it. He turned back to Daniel, his eyes searching, as if trying to find the missing piece of the puzzle. You truly believe this is normal, don't you? Daniel scratched his chin. I mean, yeah. Xelthari exhaled sharply. That is what makes you terrifying. A lesson in fear. A soldier stepped into the room, helmet sleek and reflective, weapon slung over his shoulder. Captain, the ship is secure. Orders. Daniel turned back to Malixer. You're gonna deliver a message, he said simply. Malixer bared his teeth. I will do no such thing. Daniel crouched down so he was eye level with the warlord. His tone was calm, even friendly. See, that's the thing. You're gonna go back to your empire. You're gonna tell them what happened here. And then, he smiled. You're gonna warn them. Malixer's fists clenched. Warn them of what? Daniel's smile widened. That we're just getting started. The aftermath. Hours later, the Xelthari warship was allowed to limp away, its remaining crew shaken, its leader broken. Malixer sat in silence, staring at the reflection in the viewport. The proud warrior he once knew was gone. In his place sat something lesser, something defeated, and worst of all, the humans had let him live. Not out of mercy, but because they wanted him to spread the fear. The warlord's claws trembled as he whispered the words he never thought he would say. They are not normal. Xelthari stood beside him, staring into the endless void. His voice was hollow. No, he agreed. They are something much worse. The rising fear. Malixer had been in countless battles. He had watched worlds burn, had led invasions that crushed entire civilizations. He had never feared an enemy before. But now, as his damaged warship drifted through the void, he found himself gripping the armrest of his command chair with shaking claws. Silence filled the bridge. His crew, those who had survived, sat stiffly at their stations, their usual discipline replaced with something unfamiliar, something unnatural. Doubt. Even the war-worn veterans avoided his gaze. They had all seen it. They had all felt it. The way the humans fought, the way they refused to break, the way they came for one soldier as if he were worth an entire fleet. This wasn't strategy. It wasn't tactics. It was something worse. It was madness. Malixer exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to remain steady. Send a transmission to High Command. Tell them we have encountered an anomaly. A young officer hesitated before responding. Do you what kind of anomaly, my lord? The warlord's claws tightened. His next words felt like venom on his tongue. Humans. The Xelthari Council's reaction. A few cycles later, Malixer knelt before the High Command, a gathering of the most powerful Xelthari warlords and strategists. Their faces flickered on the holoscreens, their expressions ranging from annoyance to mild curiosity. "You were defeated by a single human fleet," one of the council members sneered. "Your failure shames us, Malexer." Malexer clenched his jaw. He had expected this. "The humans are not what we believed," he said carefully. An older strategist, Warlord Xelthari, waved a claw dismissively. "We already know about their resilience. They are adaptable. That does not make them a threat." Malexer's eyes darkened. "It is not their adaptability that concerns me. It is their mentality." Silence. One of the council members leaned forward. "Explain." Malexer took a slow breath. "Every species we have conquered has known fear. They understood when they were beaten. Even the strongest warriors surrendered when it was logical to do so." He gritted his fangs. "But humans, they do not surrender." More murmurs. Xelthari narrowed his eyes. "You speak as if they are some kind of anomaly." "They are an anomaly," Malexer snapped. He straightened, his voice steady. "They do not fight for survival alone. They fight for something deeper. And they do not stop until they have won." The council exchanged glances. One of them, a veteran who had seen countless wars, scoffed. "If they refuse to surrender, they will simply be eradicated." Malexer's claws dug into his palms. "Then tell me, how do you kill something that refuses to die?" The spread of fear. Across the Xelthari Empire, whispers of the humans began to spread. It started in the military barracks, where soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the creatures that had no limits. It spread to the officers who studied battle reports filled with impossible outcomes. It reached the strategists, who struggled to explain why human fleets ignored all conventional tactics, fighting with an unpredictability that made no sense. The fear trickled upward, reaching even the most powerful warlords. And then something unthinkable happened. For the first time in Xelthari history, young warriors began deserting. An unthinkable decision. Xelthari stood in his private chamber, reviewing reports from across the empire. The numbers were undeniable. Morale was dropping. Recruits were hesitant. Entire fleets were questioning orders. It was a slow poison, creeping through the heart of the empire. All because of one species. He exhaled, pressing a clawed hand to his forehead. They had underestimated the humans. And now, they faced a choice. Continue the war and risk a drawn-out conflict against an enemy that did not break. Or, find another way. Xelthari tapped his communicator. Summon the diplomats. The Xelthari Empire did not negotiate. They did not bow. But today, they would do the unthinkable. Today, they would consider peace. Because the alternative was extinction. The unstoppable force. The Xelthari Empire had never sent diplomats before. They had never needed to. For centuries, they had ruled with power, crushing all who opposed them. When the weak begged for peace, they were ignored. When the strong resisted, they were destroyed. Yet now, in a dimly lit chamber aboard a neutral space station, a group of Xelthari envoys sat across from a team of human negotiators. Tension thickened the air. At the head of the human delegation sat Admiral Catherine Vos, a woman known for leading countless victories against alien forces. Her expression was unreadable as she tapped her fingers against the metal table. On the other side, Warlord Xelthari sat rigid, his claws twitching against the armrest. He had never felt this kind of unease before. The humans had forced him here, not with diplomacy, not with threats, but with something far more terrifying. Their sheer refusal to lose. The room remained silent until Xelthari finally spoke. The Xelthari Empire is willing to discuss terms. A smirk tugged at Admiral Vos' lips. Now that's interesting. The Xelthari's desperation. Xelthari's jaw tightened. Do not misunderstand. We are not here out of weakness. Admiral Vos raised an eyebrow. A fleet of warships gets dismantled. Your warriors start deserting. And now you're here, offering peace. That sure sounds like weakness to me. Murmurs rippled through the human side of the table. The Xelthari delegation remained still, but Xelthari could feel the weight of their shame pressing down on them. Still, he had no choice. He inhaled sharply. Your people are unstable, reckless, irrational. His eyes flickered with something dangerous. But you are also relentless, and we recognize that a war against your kind will not end quickly. Admiral Vos leaned forward, her tone casual but laced with steel. You mean it won't end in your favor? Silence. Xelthari could not argue. Because she was right. The unbreakable will of humanity. One of the Xelthari envoys finally spoke. We wish to understand. What is it that drives you? Why do you not surrender? Why do you fight as if you do not fear death? Admiral Vos chuckled softly. You want to know why we don't break? Xelthari exhaled sharply. Yes. Her smirk faded. She folded her hands together, her voice turning cold. You think we don't fear death. You think we don't feel pain. Her piercing gaze locked onto Xelthari's own. We do feel it. We do fear it. She let the words hang in the air before leaning forward. But the difference between us and you, we keep going anyway. The Xelthari envoy stiffened. Xelthari felt a chill creep down his spine. Admiral Vos gestured toward her team. That soldier over there. She lost her entire squad in a battle last year. That man. He had to watch his home burn, his family slaughtered. And me. Her voice hardened. I've buried more people than I can count. The Xelthari watched, silent. We don't keep fighting because we enjoy it. Admiral Vos continued. We fight because if we don't, the people we love, our families, our friends, our species, will be wiped out. Her voice lowered, but the weight of her words seemed to fill the room. We fight because we refuse to die easy. Xelthari realized, in that moment, the truth. The humans were not fearless. They were not immune to suffering. They simply refused to be controlled by it. The choice before the Xelthari. The chamber remained silent for a long time. Finally, Xelthari exhaled and stood. Then we have a decision to make. Admiral Vos gave him an expectant look. Xelthari turned to his fellow Xelthari. We can continue this war and bleed ourselves dry, knowing that no matter how many humans we kill, they will keep coming. Or, his gaze returned to Admiral Vos. We end this conflict now. He could feel the tension in his warriors, the shame of stepping back from battle. But he had seen enough. The Xelthari Empire had faced countless enemies before. But humans were not just another enemy. They were an unstoppable force. Xelthari straightened. We will agree to peace. Admiral Vos smiled. Smart choice. And just like that, for the first time in history, the Xelthari Empire bowed. The final lesson. The war was over. At least, that's what the Xelthari High Command had declared. For the first time in their history, the mighty empire had chosen peace over conquest, not because they had been outgunned, not because they had been outmaneuvered, but because they had encountered something they could not break. Something that defied all logic. Humans. But Malixer knew better. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The unsettling aftermath. Malixer stood aboard the observation deck of his personal warship, staring into the abyss of space. The diplomatic talks had concluded. The peace agreement had been signed. The Xelthari Empire would withdraw its fleets, halt its expansion, and recognize human sovereignty. On paper, the war was finished. But the warlord's claws twitched at his sides. His mind raced with unease. There was something wrong about all of this. Xelthari, the scientist who had studied human psychology, stood beside him, his yellow eyes filled with something unreadable. You feel it too, Malixer muttered. Xelthari nodded slowly. Yes. The warlord exhaled, his mind playing back every moment. Danglerain's smirk in the interrogation chamber, the eerie calm of the human strike team, Admiral Vos' unwavering confidence. This peace, Malixer whispered, It does not feel like a victory for us." Xelthari didn't answer, because he knew the truth, that Xelthari had not negotiated peace. They had surrendered. The quiet war. For years, that Xelthari had ruled by fear. They had crushed rebellions, wiped out civilizations, and broken entire species under their boot. Fear was a weapon they understood. But now something far more dangerous was spreading through the empire. Not rebellion, not war, doubt. Young warriors whispered in the barracks, questioning the old ways. Veteran commanders hesitated before issuing battle orders, their once unshakable faith in their empire cracked. And at the heart of it all was humanity. They hadn't just won a battle. They had infected the Xelthari with something far worse than defeat. They had planted an idea. What if the Xelthari were not the strongest? What if everything they believed about power and conquest was wrong? The true horror of humanity. Malexer clenched his fists. He had thought humans were terrifying because of their ability to fight, their refusal to surrender, their resilience. But that wasn't the real reason to fear them. No, the true horror of humanity was that they did not need to conquer you to defeat you. They didn't have to raise planets. They didn't have to break civilizations. All they had to do was exist, and they would change you. Malexer turned to Xelthari, his voice low and grim. They are not warriors. Xelthari frowned. Then what are they? Malexer's throat tightened as he spoke the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They are something far worse. He looked back at the stars, knowing, without a doubt, that the Xelthari Empire would never be the same again. Because the war hadn't ended. It had just gone silent. And the humans, they had already won.